Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 11 of an introduction to agent-based modeling. This week, this is our last week of new content, right? So this will be Unit 9 of the course. And I apologize. I sent out a little email yesterday about it, but there was a small mess up where Unit 9 actually got published as Unit 8. Long story short, everything should be fixed now. Not all of Unit 9 is up. I still want to get up the new versions of MapReduce, which accidentally got published last week, which talk about anonymous functions, because that's a very important new concept in the way NetLogo treats some of the very advanced functionality. And this is more to do with kind of like software engineering, programming concepts than it is to do with agent-based modeling in particular. But you'll find these tools very useful as if you go forward using NetLogo, or for that matter, using a lot of functional programming systems that are out there, right? NetLogo, descends from Logo, which descends from Lisp, and so it shares a lot of those concepts and tools. The other big announcement, right, is that the final project is due today, and I've had a couple of requests to extend the deadline, so I'm going to push it out. I'm going to push it out another 48 hours actually, and I'll push out the final peer review deadline as well, 48 hours, which means the course won't officially close until that deadline. Which, let me do the math real quick as I'm talking to you, but essentially that means you have 2 more days to complete the final project, and also 2 more days to complete all of the aspects of the class, right? Okay. So I'll kind of update that really quickly. End date. So the end date will now actually be August 31st for the entire class, and the final project is now due 48 hours from now, right? Give people a little bit more time as they're finishing up with what they're working on, okay? And I am in the process of updating those deadlines as we speak. So it should all be showing up shortly. Anyways, so you have until Thursday at midnight Pacific time in order to finish the final project, okay? So that hopefully gives people a little bit extra time to kind of get their hands around it and really get some good content in there, okay? Let's see, what else has come up? So that's the big announcement, right? Final assignment deadline is extended by 2 more days. Had a couple other small questions come up in the email and come up over discussion forums, which I'm happy to talk about, but I will get to those in a second. Just to remind again the content of Unit 9. So Unit 8 is kind of like the various vignettes and stories of of how agent-based modeling come about and what kind of things would work out, right? But Unit 9 is more about advanced concepts, and it's a little bit of a little mishmash of different topics. So there's a little bit about where, how can I put this, where agent-based modeling is going in my mind, which a lot of that deals with like data-driven and new methods to integrate with agent-based models. But a lot of it's also to deal with like advanced modeling concepts from NetLogo that will help you to try and work through doing some more complex kind of programming, essentially, right? And so that will also be part of what Unit 9 is about. So all those things are kind of in there, kind of together for Unit 9. Yeah, other than that, I think that's it in terms of general administrative trivia and what's going on. Hopefully that kind of helps set some guidelines. Also, I'm having trouble getting to some of my notes, so I apologize for the small delay trying to click through and can't seem to get it up. Okay, But if there are any questions, feel free to shoot them off on the YouTube channel. I've also, I take a peek at the Twitter interactions at the same time, so tweet at intro to ABM if you have additional questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of go over some of the questions that have come up on the forums and been sent via email over the course of this week. Okay. So one easy one that came up that I wanted to, well, not exactly talk about, but a couple of things that people have wondered about. One of the things that came up a couple of times was getting your turtles to populate in certain parts of the world. And we talked a little bit about this last time when we talked about the trying to divide the world into different regions, right? But I was getting to kind of take you through a couple of things about how to get your turtles in different places, right? Okay. So I'm pulling up NetLogo now so you can see this a little bit better. There we go. Is that? Yeah, okay. So you should be able to see NetLogo now. Okay. So one of the questions was a simpler question. It was about, let's say I want to create my turtles so they all show up on the top half of the world, right? So we can create our 100 turtles just like normal, right? Let's put in a clear all, right? And then we're going to just ask our turtles to, and sometimes we do set x, y, random x core, random p core, random y core, sorry. Get a little ahead of myself. So in this case, what we could do is, let's say we want to appear on the top half of the world. Then we can say random x core, because we don't really care about the x coordinate, where they are left or right. And then for the y coordinate, we can simply say random float max py core. Now max py core is actually going to get the center of the patch that's at the maximum of the world. So in order to get all the values between that and the top of the world, you actually have to add 1/2 because the distance between the center of the patch and the top is 1/2, right? So if we do this, right, and we type, let me scale my screen a little bit so you can see that better. I want to blow up the text, but I didn't do that. There we go. Okay. So now if I type in setup, you'll see that the turtles all appear at the top side of the world, right? Now, and of course, I could also make them all appear in the bottom side of the world by just taking this random float value that I get and inverting it, right? So now if I hit setup, I get in the bottom side. Now this is all with the center of the world at 0, 0, right? Clearly you could have the center of the world in other places. Now of course you can also do the same thing for x coordinates, right? Instead of y coordinates, just have to change and reverse all your variables, right? Okay? So that's a quick little demonstration about how you could kind of get your turtles to initially populate at particular parts of the world, right? Another question that was in the same email was, let's say that there's 1,000 units of, some resource, say wealth, right? How would you distribute those randomly among everyone where everyone has an equal chance of getting one, right? Well, the first thing you'd have to do is you have to give turtles the property of wealth, right? And then what I would do is I would say repeat number of resources, ask one of turtles, set wealth plus 1, right? Now, we didn't actually create number of resources because it's going to yell at us, so we'd have to add that as a slider. Well, we might as well add a button for setup too, since we're playing around with setup, right? Number resources. And then one thing, sometimes, I talk about component testing, but I haven't really illustrated it very much. So let me illustrate another example of component testing. So if I distribute all the wealth to all these different turtles, right, then once I do that, the sum of all of them should be should be whatever the number of resources is, right? So I can say to check resources if sum of wealth of turtles does not equal num resources, then print error resources not distributed, right? So, and then I could always, if in this case, this could be an inline check, so I could put it at the end of every setup, right? And now I can type setup, and you see it doesn't print the error, but that doesn't tell me that it's working. So usually what I like to do, so that's fine as the default mechanism, but the very first time, a couple of times I run it, I want to make sure that it's actually working. So one thing I can do is say print sentence sum of wealth, and then just do sum wealth of turtles. All right, and print sentence num resources, and this just lets me verify that these two numbers are exactly the same, right? Num resource. Now, num resource, I should be able to just look at the slider and say. By the way, something you often see in NetLogo where you do print sentence. And the reason why you do the print sentence is that sentence takes multiple strings and puts them together, right? Multiple elements of a string. So it's a way of combining strings with things like variables that you're executing as well, right? And so it helps out in that respect. So, now if you look down here, right, it says sum of wealth 50, number of resources 50. And I can move the slider there, and it gets the right answers, right? Now, this is just kind of distributing them totally randomly, right? So if you wanted to actually see how they were distributed, you could always say wealth of turtles, right? And I'll just print it out. And as you can see, I had 100 turtles, but only 32 resources, so some of them got 2, and many of them got 1, and a lot of them got 0. The one last kind of little thing I was going to talk about, right, is there was a bunch of code about, well, what if I want everyone to, say, appear on the left side of the screen like we're doing, but I don't want them to be in the same spot as another turtle, right? So one thing you can do is you can start with the normal set XY to try and set your location. And then you can say, while any turtles here, do the same thing again, right? So what this is going to do is as long as there are turtles in your same location, it's just going to keep setting up, and while always 6 brackets, the one kind of unusual thing, while there are any turtles there, because it's actually a reporter that's being passed the while loop, right? While there are any turtles here, keep changing my location, right? And you can't see it. Oh, what I really meant to write was the opposite. Go ahead and halt. By the way, there's the tools halt if you ever get an infinite loop like that. You can also just modify the code and automatically recompile and stop the code from executing. Well, what we're still saying is, while not any turtles here, right? So, nope. The problem, I was like, that code is right. While any other turtles here, because obviously you're there, right? So you need to make sure that there aren't any other turtles where you are, right? So once you just set up, now there will no longer be any turtle on more than one square. Now, it might appear like, for instance, that this turtle here, right, the one I'm now highlighting if you see it, and this turtle here are on the same square. But if we inspect them, so let's see, so those are turtles 78 and 80. So if we do list x4, y4 of turtle 78, right, and 80, you can see, actually what we want is patch here. A turtle 7 of 80 is So turtle 80 is at negative 9.7, and turtle 78 is negative 8.6. Now, it's actually possible to tell that from the actual coordinates, but it's a little difficult to read. So 78, right, is negative 8.6 because 6.2 is less than 6. It's between 5.5 and 6.5, and negative 8.2 is between negative 7.5 and negative 8.5. And this one's on negative 8.5, which is less than negative, which is patched negative 9 because it's greater, it's between negative 8.5 and negative 9.5, and patch 7 because it's between 6.5 and 7.5, right? But those coordinates actually look like they're really close to each other. In fact, they are. They're just on different patches, right? So that's one way you can tell the differences between them, right? And then, you know, the question also became, well, what about if I want the turtles to move around in such a way that they're never on the same patch, right? Well, then what I can say is ask turtles if any turtles on patch ahead 1, right turn random 90, left turn random 90, right? Actually, I should say while any turtles on patch ahead 1. So this is basically just going to kind of wiggle until I can find a place that I can move to without, oh, I forgot to close my bracket. So what this is doing is saying, you know, if there are any turtles ahead of me, keep wiggling, right, until there aren't any turtles directly ahead of me, right? So let's add this as a button. Set up, go, and you can see that maybe not completely clear that they're not overlapping. One way you could do that is you could say set p color, right? This may be still not completely obvious, but you can do it step by step, right? So you can see they're all kind of in different spaces, right? And they're trying, now they can run over each other's trails, right? But it's just trying to show that they're not overlapping. Okay. So let's go ahead and delete that. Now, the problem with that is if you have a lot of turtles, right? That this code could create an infinite loop. So let's see, if we, for instance, make it 10,000 turtles. Maybe even 1,000 might be enough. Let's see. Right, yeah, so we now have a turtle that's stuck in an infinite loop. Oh, actually because of the setup routine. Right, because there isn't enough spots on the left-hand side for them to all locate. So let's even if we comment, because there's less than 1,000 spots on this side, but even if we comment out the startup, right, we can still get into a problem. Yeah, we got it right away there because we actually cluster them all in the middle. Because there's these turtles in the middle that just keep wiggling and wiggling and wiggling and can never find a way out because they're surrounded by a turtle on every side. So whenever you do that, whenever you have the possibility of accidentally including an infinite loop, right, there's two ways around it. One is to kind of detect it automatically and, like, say, for instance, I know that if I have 8 turtles around me, I'm going to hit an infinite loop. So you can actually, for instance, check the values of each one. That's great. It requires a lot of code. Another one is just to say, well, you got 10 chances to get off your patch. And if you don't get off your patch in those 10 chances, you're stuck. So what you can do is say, let tries be 0, right? And while tries is less than 10, for instance, and any turtles on patch, do the following. And then every time you do it, you just increment your try comment, right? So if we do this, oh, try. Let's go back in. Comment out. The setup routine. So in this case, right, we got the same world as before, but now they're going to slowly expand because what's going to happen is the turtles, wow, like it's a little psychedelic, but the turtles basically are, if they're stuck in that middle square, right, they try 10 times and they can't, they just don't do anything that turn, right? So that's one way that we commonly use to kind of get around these potentials for infinite loops that might exist. Okay. But, if we put all the code back to its beginning, it works fine. It goes really psychedelic really quick. I'm going to take out that color line. I'll comment it out so something else to back. That was a couple of different questions we had about turtle placement, how to get them to go exactly where you want. And I will make this code available online afterwards. Call it turtle placement. Okay. So those were a couple of good questions that came up. And I saw while I was talking that a question popped up on YouTube, a couple of them actually. What is the best way to get pre-submission peer review of our models? I think that my info tab is matching what is going on, but wonder if I can improve the model in any way. In this example, is there any reason to do the set x, y? Oh, sorry, that's another question. So Chris, pre-submission peer review. I think, one thing you can do is if you can post it to a website somewhere, that's fine. And then you can put a link in the forum and ask people to take a look at it. And, I think a lot of people would appreciate that. So I think that's probably the best way to do that. I mean, easiest thing there is if you just do if you post it on Google Drive or Dropbox or something like that, most of those will allow you to get a shareable link for anyone, right? Yeah, and so that would be a good way to do it. So hopefully that helps. Chris also asked, in this example, is there any reason to do the set xy in the CRT command versus right afterwards? Let me look at how I did that actually and see if there's a good answer to that. Okay. Oh, okay, yeah. So I could have done it rightly in. So as you know, there is an implicit ask immediately afterwards, and I think actually for this code, I probably could have done it that way. Yeah, and that would work. Occasionally, you want to do it. Let's see. We'll double check. We'll see it real quick and see if that works. Okay, set up. Okay. Yeah, it seems to work okay, right? Yeah, and I didn't expect. There's no reason why I anticipated it to break. Occasionally, especially when you're dealing with interactions between turtles, you have to create them before you can check all the interactions because you might want to check where multiple turtles are when creating it. I actually didn't know before writing this code whether or not I was going to have that happen, and so I wrote it that way just because that way it would allow me to have all the turtles there simultaneously. Whenever I'm having a special condition where I have to check for interactions with other turtles, I almost always do the create separately and then do an ask later because then I know that all the turtles are there. The problem here is that as you're creating turtles, right, there's only, say, 20 other turtles or 1 other turtle or 0 other turtles around, right? And in this case, that doesn't matter, but sometimes, when I'm, for instance, creating a social network, if it was instead of a spatial network, that would come into play, right? And so that's why whenever there's interactions, I always do that. Is there a workaround to disable sliders and choosers like the option available for buttons? As far as I know, no. There is no way to disable sliders. You were talking about, for those of you who don't know, right? If you, let me see. Actually, I have to add this in separately as a window. I apologize. This is the way OBS works. Okay. So network button. There we go. Okay. So for those of you who don't realize this, right? There is this button that says disable ticks until start, right? And so, sorry, disable button until start. And so what happens with that is that it's grayed out, and then it doesn't become available. Actually, it doesn't. Actually, you have to actually click tick or reset ticks. Right? So let me see, reset ticks. And reset ticks is actually the command that's going to activate those buttons, right? I should. If I'm going to do that, I might as well put a tick in too. Okay. so reset ticks enables those buttons, right? Until you, so if I hit setup, then it becomes enabled. If I hit clear all, now it's gonna not be enabled, right? And if I hit setup, it becomes enabled. So there is no way. There is a NetLogo style, right? And the NetLogo style says that any sliders or parameters or inputs that you're going to change before the model runs should be put above the model. And any sliders that you're going to change or are allowed to be changed after the model runs, sorry, I said that wrong. Any sliders that can be changed before the model runs run should be put above the setup and go buttons. And any sliders that are going to be changed after the model is running are put below. Now that's not strictly enforced, right? There's nothing to prevent you from doing that. But for instance, I could add a speed slider to control the speed of how fast my turtles move, right? And then I could go in and modify my code to be, say, forward speed, right? Okay. Now, this might be a parameter that I want people to be able to change while the model is running, whereas number of resources, obviously I don't, because I only distribute the resources at the very beginning, right? And so it's not easy to see that that's having much of an effect unless you slow it down a little bit, right? And then you can see as I move this up, then the turtle starts jumping, right? So the idea is that if you have a slider in your model that you don't want people to manipulate until after the model is running, or you want, actually it's usually phrased the other way around. If you have a slider you don't want people to manipulate after the model is running, then you put it up above setup and go. And if you want to manipulate it or potentially manipulate it after the model running, then you put it below setup and go. Again, there's nothing that enforces this. It's just NetLogo style, right? Oh, yeah, sorry. Let me get rid of that window capture button. Okay. So let me try that explanation again without having the big button window obfuscating everything. So what I was trying to say was that if you want to have a slider that people can manipulate before the run, right, then put it above the setup and go. And if you want to have one that manipulate while the run is going on, then put it below setup and go. But again, this is NetLogo style, not NetLogo syntax, and nothing forces you to do this, right? So here I added the speed slider, right, that just changes the forward speed value, how far I'm moving, right? And you know, that's something that maybe I want to be able to manipulate let users manipulate while the model is running, right? And you can see it has an effect if I move the slider around. But something like num resources, which only happens during setup, I probably don't want people manipulating after the model is running, so I put that above the setup. So again, unfortunately, any way to do it permanently, but that is a specific word, a specific kind of guideline to that. Hopefully that helps now that I took away the button edit window, and that makes sense. Okay. Jorge Martinez asks, are you familiar with the work of Hedstrom's Dissecting the Social? I do know some. I've read a Hedstrom couple of papers along the way, but don't know if I remember that one in particular, unfortunately. And I don't know any off the top of my head of a model that replicates that work. As always, I highly recommend check out NetLogo models library first. You can search for things like Hedstrom dissecting and stuff like that. Probably nothing will show up. Then I check out the community library that's up on the NetLogo page, and then I would check out the NetLogo modeling commons, and then I would check out OpenABM, and then finally I might go to scholar.google.com and search for agent-based modeling and dissecting the social or something like that. Sorry, I can't be more help on that one. Okay, let's see. So, another interesting question came up in the email about how to model neurons communicating. And I thought this was an interesting question just because it's a question that's almost impossible to answer without knowing the point of the model. And this is why I always say you've got to start with what the point of your model is, right? Try and figure out what it's doing, right? If I say I want to model neurons communicating, that doesn't tell me how to best build that model, right? You have to tell me, are you interested in just the patterns of communication, right? In which case, something like an information diffusion type model, working from that, like what we built in Unit 4, might be a good place to start, right? Now, you don't have all the biological same entities, components, entities and components. I try to mix those two, entities. But entities and components, but hopefully, you've got the basic idea, and then you can maybe add biological delays, like the fact that it takes potassium channels so long to open, sodium channels so long to close, right? Like you can build in elements like that into the way the transmission model works, right? On the other hand, if what you're really interested in understanding exactly like the learning function of a neuron or something like that, right? Then there's models in the models library that are based upon artificial neural networks. That might be a good place to start. So there's a model of the perceptron, there's a model of the neural net, right? But those are much more detailed at the level of neuronal computation, but less detailed at the level of information transmission, right? And so this is why it's very important, terribly important, not to say how do I model this system, but to ask the question, to figure out what the question you want to ask about the system is, and then build a model that lets you answer that question, right? You can model many different entities at many different levels of resolution. And it's not clear which of those levels of resolution is most appropriate for a particular model. Okay. There's also a couple of questions that came up on some more complex subjects about people, for instance, who wanted to build models and then figure out how to best get the best set of parameters that would optimize two different sets of functions. So imagine, for instance, you're looking at the travel models that we talked about, right? Like the road models, right? And in one of them, we kind of did this thing where we optimized a little bit towards fuel efficiency, right? But we also care about how long it takes people to get places, right? Because time is money, right? And so what if we want to maximize both fuel efficiency and minimize the time in traffic, right? How do you do that? Well, I'm not going to give you an answer here because it turns out that is a whole bag of additional questions. But the key phrase you're going to want to remember is multi-objective optimization, right? You have multiple decisions that you're trying to make simultaneously, or multiple objectives that you're trying to optimize simultaneously. And the simple answer is, unless there's a linear way to combine those objectives, right? If a minute of delay in traffic is worth 1 additional gallon of gas, right? If that's the case, then you can usually write a simple linear model that combines those two functions and expresses the output as a combination of those two, right? Like, beta 1 times fuel efficiency plus beta 2 times delay in traffic equals some y value that you're optimizing, right? Unless that is the case, unless you have some sort of simple, nice, linear, in some case nonlinear, right? It could be a nonlinear combination of those functions. It's very hard to think about. A lot of times what you actually wind up doing is kind of running simulations, lots of different simulations where you're optimizing one or the other, and that kind of gives you, say, a Pareto frontier of all the possible values, right, that exist between the two. But just quickly say that's I demonstrated a little bit how you might optimize certain values, and the behavior search does a good job of this. Actually, some of the work we're trying to get some funds for right now to do is to make behavior search do multi-objective optimization, which would be really cool, but it doesn't do that right now. I just want to reiterate, like when I was doing my live coding last time, right? And I kind of took a big pause, and like it took me 5 minutes to figure out that I hadn't called the function I thought I was calling, right? I've gotten a couple emails recently where people are like really confused, think their models are doing really weird things. and it turns out that they just have a negative sign out of place or something like that, right? So a lot of times, and I talked a little bit about this in an earlier chapter, the difference between complexity and bugs in your code, right, is something that's important and that we should think about quite a bit, right? And we should spend as much time as we can building component tests to make sure our model works, right? Give you a quick example. I'm working on a model right now with some colleagues in the IS area on how fast companies should innovate, right? And they have this nice equational form for computing what the average cost of a firm entering the market was, right? Which is great, fantastic, right? And they had all these properties they'd written out, right? That as, the average arrival time of firms goes to 0, this value goes to this, right? So the first thing I did, rather than writing the code to actually compute this cost, right, which was a fairly complex calculation where it had to compute a mu, and that mu was used to calculate an alpha, and then that alpha was used to make a draw from a beta distribution. Not terribly important, but it's about 4 or 5 lines of NetLogo code that wasn't simple, right? And so the first thing I did was I wrote code that checked to make sure that for known values of that equation, I would, or a couple equations, that I would get the results that they had mathematically proved I should get the results for, right? So, one was this t goes to infinity, then the limit of this function approaches 0. So I could write that. I can basically say set t to an arbitrarily large number, 100,000, right? And then check to see if the difference between the return value and 0 is less than, say, 0.001, or whatever my arbitrary level of tolerance is, right? Now, we can't actually make t go to infinity in our models, right? We can't do that because these are discrete systems, right? They're solving real value equations. They're not integrating arbitrarily under sums and stuff like that, right? But they're not symbolic. That's the word I'm looking for. But what we can do is we can write functions that basically check to see that the system is within some tolerance, right? So I wrote that first, and I just want to reiterate again that as much as possible, make sure that all the components of your system are working correctly before you assume that there's either some amazing emergent phenomenon happening in your model, which there might very well be, but just double check, or B, that there's a bug. I don't know how many times I've heard that there's a bug in NetLogo, right? The NetLogo is not. NetLogo at this point is an open source product that's been around since 1999, right? So the base mechanisms are pretty well tried. Now, not to say that bugs don't happen; they still do, right? But it's probably not going to be in something like the random number generator at this point, or something like that, right? It's going to be in some sort of new graphical display or things like that, right? That actually reminds me of another question I got over email this last week, which was actually on the discussion forums, which is about someone using the R plugin plus this R module, right, plus NetLogo, and definitely post those to the forum. I think they're great. Like someone might have run across the exact same thing, but I think a lot of times things like that, posting them to something like Stack Overflow and making sure they have the NetLogo tag on them, or emailing the original developers. In this case, this one was developed by Volker Grimm, who I know quite well, and one of his colleagues, right? And so emailing them and saying, hey, has anyone else run into this bug? You'd be surprised, as someone who has worked on my own software projects over the years, right? You would be surprised how flattering it is to get an email from someone saying, hey, I'm working with software, I think it's great, but I found this small problem with it, right? It's a nice surprise, and usually people respond very pleasantly to that, okay? So I highly encourage you to reach out and figure out if someone else is actually doing that. Let's see if there's anything else come up. I think that's it. There is a plan, by the way, if you're falling behind, not able to keep up, right? There is some issues with, there is a plan to have the course again next summer, right? We haven't worked out all the details, but stay tuned to complexityexplorer.org, and hopefully you'll get the announcements and all the dates if you're just not able to finish. Or if you love this class, right, and you're like, I just want to do it again, and I think it would be useful, right, definitely feel free to look at it. As of August 31st, right, the discussion forums and a lot of those contents will be shut down, but the materials will, general materials, especially the videos, will be made available in perpetuity, right? So that's a great way to check out all the materials going forward. Any other questions? Anything else going on out there? If not, I'm going to shut the stream down for today. That's most important stuff I've had come in along the ways. Okay, just checking the Twitter feed. Nothing seems to be popping up there. Checking the YouTube channel. Seems good there. Big announcement. You got 2 more days to work on your final assignment, but I'm not going to give any more extensions after that. We just got to get going with the peer reviews, right? And then August 31st will be at midnight West Coast time will be the last day of class, right? All of Unit 9 will be up this week, which is the last unit. So from here on out, we're just kind of, you're finishing up the exams and doing everything and getting it in as best as possible, okay? So thank you, everyone, for being here today. I will do an office hour next week and the week after, right? If you have any questions, please send them in ahead of time. Other than that, it's been great. Take care, everybody.